All right, so it's my honor today to introduce our speakers. And as we were preparing, we were trying to figure out how we got over 400 people registered for this program today. And I think it's because both Martina Vandenberg and Evelyn Chumbau are both, they're a duo of rock stars. And we know you've done work all over this nation and this world. So we are especially grateful to you to be with us here in our corner of the world in North Florida. I'm going to take a moment and introduce them. They've both asked me not to go into their wonderful and extensive bios, which we featured on the registration page. So you can read all about them there, but I want to start out and just give you a little bit of information about them. First, Martina Vandenberg is the founder and president of the Human Trafficking Legal Center. Martina established the Human Trafficking Legal Center, which was also called HT Pro Bono, in 2012, with generous support from the Open Society Foundation's Fellowship Program. And Martina, I know that it's been a pleasure and a joy to know you all these years and to still be working with you now. So thank you. Martina spent over 2 decades really doing work around human trafficking, forced labor, rape as a war crime, and violence against women. She's testified in front of Congress, trained more than 3,600 pro bono attorneys. Probably maybe a couple more are going to be on this call, we hope, so you can add to your tally there. And then in your bio, I just wanted to note as well that while you were living in the Russian Federation in the 90s, you co-founded one of the first rape crisis centers in Russia for women. So Martina, thank you for all that you do and that you have done. So grateful to know you and to have you here today.
Thank you.
I'd also like to introduce you to Evelyn Chumbau, who is now the operations manager and survivor advocate. Your brand new job, Evelyn, yay, at the HT, I almost said HT Pro Bono, Human Trafficking Law Center. I'm still locked into who you were. Okay, so Evelyn is a survivor of child labor trafficking turned anti-trafficking advocate and activist and public speaker, who focuses her life's work on ending modern day slavery. Today, she works tirelessly to raise awareness in communities to create employment opportunities for trafficking survivors. She has been invited to speak to several government agencies about human trafficking from a survivor's perspective. And again, these are all listed here. And I'd also like to note how you were appointed by President Obama to serve on the National Advisory Council on Human Trafficking. And you have spoken all over the world on this issue and really extensively awarded. Your speaking out on racism is so important as well, and it clearly intersects, and you all will see how important that is for us to know and to act on here. Evelyn serves as an advisor to human trafficking NGOs and hopes to leverage her unique position as a former child slave to end human trafficking in West Africa, in her hometown, and in the rest of the world. So welcome, Evelyn and Martina.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you for that great introduction. We said you should cut it shorter, but thank you again. And thank you for having me here. I am so grateful to be here, to be talking to you today about child labor trafficking, especially as a survivor of human trafficking, such a young age. Robert mentioned, I now started working with the Human Trafficking Legal Center, which I'm very excited. I'm so happy about it. I get to do something that I love, and so, most of child labor trafficking / modern day slavery by me. And I love this quote. I learned a lot about, doing my time in the university. I learned a lot about slavery in America, and somebody that really inspired me was Harriet Tubman. As you can see in this quote right here, now I have been free and I know what a dreadful condition slavery is. I have seen hundreds of escaped slaves, but I've never saw one who was willing to go back and be a slave. And that quote resonates so much to me. I've had it for such a long time because just like, Harriet Tubman, I'm a survivor of child labor trafficking, and it was horrible. It was awful. And I really don't want to see it happen to any kids, around the world, because again, kids are not supposed to be out there working. They're supposed to be in school. And so that will lead me to my next topic on my next slide. So right here, what is human trafficking? A form of modern day slavery. And when I talk about trafficking, I don't like to separate, because a lot of the times we separate labor and sex. The world focus a lot on sex trafficking. As you can see here, I like to talk about both, and children are affected in both part of both labor and sex trafficking. And you might be a victim of child labor trafficking, and and still be sexually exploited all the time. Depending on where you are, your trafficker can, there are people that can rape you. It happens. Imagine a little kids being raped, so we have to really acknowledge that this happened. Labor trafficking happen to children, but they also get sexually exploited as well. And I'm not going to, you can see in the slide, I don't want to read it too much, but most of you know the definition of what labor trafficking is. I want to get to the fun part. But I did put in my PowerPoint, some statistics, and just, for you to look at it. Like, there are kids all around the world that are being forced to work, doing hard, crazy jobs. And you can see the statistics here. Child labor statistic, there are 250 million in child labor globally, and 150 million of these children and in hazard work, and it's horrible. It's horrible that kids are working in this type of condition. And there's are images that you can see. And that will lead me to kind of my second poll question. So my second poll question, if we can have it up. Have you ever heard of a child held in forced labor in the United States? So before we go there, so please take your time to answer the second poll question. And on to my next slide. So bear with me, because I'm doing two things at once. Again, the worst form of child labor trafficking, as you can see right here. Children in slavery, forced in compulsion, they're forced in their bondage, and it's all form. It doesn't matter, Black, white, Asian, there are children that are being forced to work for free. They recruit them, they force them, they make them do things that they're not supposed to. And like I mentioned, they get sexually exploited as well, and they work in horrible condition. And it's really sad that we're having kids, babies, 6 years old. I cannot imagine having a 6-year-old working in a mine, and the world just turned its blind eye. So onto my experience. Again, my experience, I'll be going back and forth. I'm a victim of child labor trafficking, specifically domestic servitude. I was trafficked from age 9 until 17. You can say 17, but as you know, things happen. We grow older and we learn a lot. I was trafficked to work as a domestic servant and held in forced labor for such a long time. I escaped my trafficker when I was, I was 17 years old. Well, we're not in person, so I can't hear you, but this was before now and everything. This was kind of like the last picture with me together as with all my my family, my siblings and everything. So just in case, if you can find me, you can put it in the chat box. If you can find where I am in that picture, innocent me, you can put it in the chat box. And, coming from Cameroon, everybody was so excited. Cameroon, West, Central Africa, Cameroon is French and English. And my parents, especially my mother, she was very excited. My entire family, because again, you're leaving, Africa, you're coming to America, or you're going to Europe. It's a great opportunity. They were so happy. They were so excited, so they even threw me a farewell party. Evelyn is coming to America, but I had one mission for coming to America, and we'll get to that. Evelyn is coming to America. Everybody was just excited. So they threw me a farewell party. So that was me at a picture right there, age 9. At my farewell party is right there. As you can see how young I was, not yet developed, nothing. And back in Cameroon, all I did was go to school, have fun, just, play soccer and, play different games, but my parents, everybody was excited. Oh, she's going to America. She's going to be rich. She's going to be a lawyer and she's going to come back and help us. And here we go. The reason why I was excited at such a young age, this was the reason I was excited. My reason for being excited to coming to America was because of these television shows. As you can see here, the Cosby Show, the Fresh Prince, and 90210. Back in Cameroon, I love watching television shows. you know, I was like, when they said America, when my uncle told me, hey, you're coming to America, I was just excited because I just thought America was just like these television shows that you see. And my parents were separated, so I wasn't together with my parents. I lived with my uncle who made the arrangement for me to come to the United States. So for me, I was just like, okay, Will Smith, I'm gonna come marry you. And yeah, they have a new Fresh Prince of Bel-Air show that I will check it out soon. But I really just thought America was just like this television show. I never thought that I would come to the United States and become a victim of child labor at such a young age in a country that, as you know, slavery was abolished in 1865, and here I am working as a domestic servitor at age 9, taking care of 2 kids. So I was just really fascinated. I really thought America was just like this television show. So if you have any media person here, when you're talking about trafficking, when you're talking about America, try to show us the other part of America, just in case, because a lot of us really truly believe that America is just like this television show. Most of us, so that's what I thought. I said to you guys, I was influenced by the television shows that I watched. That's why I was excited to come here, and I felt like a child slave in my trafficker home. I did, because she promised, my understanding was a promise of a good education. That's what I was told by my uncle and my mother that made the arrangement with my trafficker. My trafficker was also Cameroonian, but she has been in the US for, I guess, since she was a young adult, because her family are very wealthy back home. So when I share my experience, I like to think of it like, wow, slavery was abolished. And yeah, it was because my trafficker's family had a big, we call it a compound, So before coming to the US, I had to go to my trafficker parents' house where my uncle took me. And I remember my trafficker mother specifically turning me around. You saw that picture at my farewell party, how small I was. My trafficker mother literally asked, isn't she a little bit too young for the job? And I'm thinking, what job is she talking about? I'm going to go marry Will Smith. What is she talking about? So she just turned me around. And while in that house, that compound, like I said, they were very wealthy. They had like a mansion, house upon house inside the compound. And in that compound, they also had kids that were probably from the village that were working as, one is cleaning the car, one was a gate person. And I saw like little boys and girls in the compound doing a lot of hard work, and so I think I'm trying, I think I move fast. You see, I should have had someone do this for me. Okay. So again, just going back, my trafficker was a woman. And when I met her, I got on the plane from Cameroon. I arrived in London. I didn't know the difference. Now I know the difference. I met my trafficker at the airport in London, and she picked me up. She was pregnant, and then she just took me. We stayed in London for like a month. I wasn't sure. So when I share my experience, you have to remember there were times that I didn't know I didn't know years, I didn't know date. I didn't keep up with that. I tried keeping a journal, but I was afraid, she was gonna take it. So we left London, and then we arrived to America. From America, I met her first child, which was a boy. That's when everything just became different. I stayed, with her. She lived in this apartment, a high-rise apartment, and she just put me straight to work, cooking and cleaning. And she got ready to deliver her second child. I became a mother to these 2 kids at such a young age. I didn't know how to do a lot of stuff, and she was getting upset. So she turned into physical abuse, and emotional abuse. So she'll beat me up. One of my punishment, I had to stand up from like 10 p.m. until 5 a.m. in the morning. And I really didn't have a bed. to sleep. I slept on the floor in America that is so cold, very cold. I slept on the floor, and there were times that I would go without eating because I burn up the food, and I have to take off my clothes, and she used whip, and she would whip me from like left to right. I have a lot of scars in my body, and even one right here, and a major one on my knee that she used like a metal broom and beat me up, and my bone, kind of cracked, and stuff like that. So she was dating a doctor. Her fiance was a doctor. So most of the time, a lot of the bruises that I had on, the doctor will come in the house to take care of it. But we can be here for 2 days if you want to hear the whole story. But moving along, I did run away. My trafficker used one passport and brought 6 of us, and one of those 6 was my cousin. And when my cousin came, she was older. She found out, oh, something can happen to you, let's get out of here, I don't want you to die. So we ran away. I did run away. We went to a family member, but the family member also took advantage of me. I also ran away from that family member, and then I went to a church. I got some help. Then from there, things start happening. I got placed into foster care. Another crazy experience. That's from there that I actually got to learn a lot about like the sex trafficking situation. But foster care was so different and was so complicated because I didn't even quite understand what was going on. And I think my foster mother at that time also did not know what to do with me because she didn't understand my situation. She didn't understand my case. And a lot of the times it is hard for people to understand labor trafficking, so foster care was just you can say it was a good place, but also I learned a lot of bad things in there. And again, when we talk about trauma, especially as a child, as a survivor of child labor trafficking, I suffered through immense trauma. It was a lot. There were times even doing my when I was still in my trafficker's house, there were times that I wanted to commit suicide because I was like, nobody cared about me. And just to let you know, I think I'm going too fast, but just to also remind you, my uncle that made the arrangement actually took money from me. So my trafficker used to mention a lot that I paid a lot of money for you, because children do get sold. So you have to understand, a lot of us children, we get sold. Family members, traffickers, they come, they make all these promises, and they sell their kids, so even though my uncle thought it was a gift, but I did get sold, I say it, and I even met with my uncle and I talk about it. But trauma wise is really, it's a lot. Think about it. A little child, her dream was to just come here and marry Will Smith. And hopefully, regardless of the other news, wanted Bill Cosby to be a daddy, but instead she became a mother at age 9. And what do you expect? You expect her to just get over it, to just forget about what happened, especially when you have scars to remember you at. So when you're dealing with a survivor that is a survivor of child labor trafficking, just know that they have gone through a lot. Their children, think about it. If you're a parent here, just imagine, having your child sleeping on the floor, taking care of 2 kids and being beaten all the time. So despite everything, despite all of that, after 18 years of not seeing my family member, I finally returned home after 18 years. That was in 2012. I was grateful. A lot of my family members thought I was dead. A lot of them were like, they didn't know if I was alive because nobody really checked up on me like that. Except my brother that I call him my Liam Nelson from Taken. But I did return home. As you can see, my grandmother, she's late now. In 2016, she passed away. That's my mom and dad right there. And I never even knew that while I was returning home, I was also going to be blessed with a little person. Again, the dream was really to marry Will Smith, but the dream for my mother was an education, be a lawyer. I did not become a lawyer, but I did get a degree, as Homeland Security, Bachelor of Science. I did work for a law firm. Guess what? Now I'm working at the Human Trafficking Legal Center that deals with lawyers. So that dream is still there. And the other dream was this little guy. So, you know, the love of my life, you know, and things like that. So that is my dream. And I am so happy. Everything happened for a reason. You know, as you can see, he's everywhere with me. And we're here talking about child labor trafficking. I refuse for anything to happen to my child. So I'm very protective because of what has happened to me as a child. So there's my little child. And, you know, when we talk, because you saw the images that I put when I was describing child labor trafficking, but I also want you to understand that in this movement, there's always been you know, in this movement, it's always been hard for people of color to come out and speak. And I've also mentioned that, you know, racism also affect, you know, also is part of racism. I don't know how to say it, but we did a survey. I worked with the Human Trafficking Legal Center last year with my colleague, Finest Alapinga, and Roxy and Deborah. So we were like, let's talk about slavery. Let's talk about racism in the movement. And because I wanted us to discuss about it. And we did a survey. I wanted to share that. I know it has nothing to do with child labor trafficking, but it's very important, you know, because we do have to address this issue as well. And as you can see in this survey right here, we said, did racism make you more vulnerable to trafficking? Which you can see right here in the column. Yes, 61% said yes. You know, 61% said yes. And you can see 6%, you know, that were white said no and do not identify with the 2%. So again, going back to my question, we did this survey and it really turned out really good. And we were just really excited that people responded to the survey. We reached out to the survivor community to get that aspect when we created the survey question. You know, I said we because it was all of us. It was a team effort. And going back, did racism make you more vulnerable to trafficking? As you can see here, 61% said yes. And the 61 are people of color, and 6% were people, you know, white, and 2% do not identify. And as you can see on the other chart right there, it says 20% said no. And out of that 20% were by people of color, and 53% were people white, and then 6% they do not identify. I mean, I really wanted you guys to kind of look at this chart again. I know we are focusing on child labor trafficking, but if you saw the images that I had when it comes to child labor trafficking, you know, you saw they were mostly people of color. You know, they were mostly people of color. And when you type human trafficking on Google, I want you to click images and you kind of see the images that you get. And this is why you know, I want to talk about this and provide you with this result that we did, this graphic, I'm overthinking stuff. Okay. Question 2, did racism impact your ability to be a leader in the anti-trafficking movement? And 45% said yes, and 95% were people of color, 3% were white, and do not identify was 3%. And as you can see on the other side, no, 35% said no, and 57% were people of color, and 40% were white, and do not identify was 3%. And the unsure, 21%. And again, you know, Robin, if you guys want details on this, you know, you can always reach out, and we're here. If you have more questions, we are here to answer your question. The next question, do you think the anti-trafficking movement is doing enough to address racism? 14% said yes, and 67% said no. Really look at that. Really, that's why I said, let's talk about it, you know, and we are talking about it, you know, and things like that, because if you want to talk about trafficking, you have to also talk about this part of it. And out of that 14%, 75% were people of color, 17% was white, and 8% do not identify. And in the no section, 67% no. And out of that 67, the pie chart, as you see, 79% were people of color and 19% white, and do not identify 2%. And of course, the unsure, which was 20%. And call of action. Again, we were focusing on child labor trafficking. I shared my experience with you. You know, I was trafficked at the age of 9. I became a mother to 2 kids that I did not know, taking care of them, you know, doing so much. And not only that, I also forgot to mention that my trafficker also had a business, which was a transportation business that carried disabled people. And I used to wash those cars. So imagine me cooking, taking care of 2 kids, you know, and then also have to wash the cars that, you know, the drivers that she hired will bring. So from living to an apartment to now we went to a house in Potomac, Maryland, which was really big. So my workload became a lot. And I used to take these kids to school. I used to take these kids to the playground. So I became a mother at such a young, I never really had any childhood fun in America. Only the childhood experience I had was really in Cameroon until from, you know, 1 until 9, you know, year. And so call of action, if you're here today, you're an attorney, you're wherever, whatever, you know, department you're working in, you know, I hope my story impact you. And the call of action is educate yourself, which you're doing today. So I'm so grateful that you're here educating yourself and to know that, you know, child labor trafficking is a big issue. Help advocate pass new laws, and which is why if you're an attorney here, also help us to understand this law. Help your clients to understand the law. That way they can help to pass this law. Engaging youth and communities in the movement, which you're doing. You know, you have this in Florida, wherever community you are, talk about this. Hopefully my story has inspired you to like want to do more to fight child labor trafficking. You know, be an informal consumer. My favorite one, employ survivors like Martina just did. She gave me a job. You know, so y'all got to give her a big up for that. She gave me a job, you know. And the last one, which I address, you know, a little bit, do not do the work to help end systematic racism. You can help stop human trafficking, especially child labor trafficking, which still exists. And what do I do now? You already know my title. You know, I used to work at a law firm, but now I work as an operation manager and survivor advocate with the Human Trafficking Legal Center. You already got the other parts. I'm not going to go into that, you know. And there are more resources. You can click this at other organizations that I support, that I've worked with. And me and Finance Lupinga, we did a up on racism based on the survey that I presented with the Humanity United. So if you want to read more about it, which was an amazing article, please, you can click on this link and you can read more about it. And Robin can send it to you guys if you're interested. Thank you. And on to you, Martina.
Okay, thank you so much, Evelyn. There is an outpouring of thanks and amazement in the chat to you. So I just want to say thank you for that amazing presentation. And thank you for coming to work with us at the Human Trafficking Legal Center. We are so lucky that we get to work with you. So my name is Martina Vandenberg. I'm president of the Human Trafficking Legal Center. I'm an attorney. I've worked on human trafficking for, I'm embarrassed to admit, more than 20 years. And I have represented trafficking survivors in labor cases, civil cases, criminal cases, immigration cases, and many others. So next slide, please. I want to, oh, Evelyn, can you still move the slides? Because I don't have power. Thank you. Okay, 2 words about the Human Trafficking Legal Center. We provide training. As Robin said, we've trained now about 5,000 lawyers across the United States, and hopefully a few more today. We provide pro bono referrals to lawyers for survivors who are seeking counsel in cases. We mentor the attorneys. We provide extensive technical assistance. We also do hard-hitting research. We have databases of every civil case ever filed under the trafficking statutes in the federal courts, and every criminal indictment since 2009 filed in the federal courts. We do strategic litigation as well. I want to, go ahead, next slide, please. Thanks. I want to spend just a few minutes, because I want to leave lots of time for questions for Evelyn. I think that's very important, but I wanted to put all of the information that Evelyn shared in context, because Evelyn's case, which was prosecuted in the United States, is not the only case. There are many more cases. This is a Headline ripped from the New York Times. It's a case brought by a young woman who filed a lawsuit against a cult. Her mother joined the cult when she was 2 years old. And this child, Kendra Ross, was placed in forced labor, held in forced labor for more than a decade. She had the courage to come forward. She found pro bono attorneys. Her pro bono attorneys took the case to civil court under the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act, which has a private right of action. She sued and she won $8 million against the cult that had trafficked her. But that cult hadn't only trafficked her. Next slide, please. That cult also trafficked many, many other children. And as we see so frequently, the civil case came first, the civil verdict came first, and then the Department of Justice indicted the case. So just in October of last year, October 2021, the Department of Justice indicted 8 individuals for their involvement in this cult that trafficked hundreds of children, if not more, around the United States. The children were taken to bakeries and restaurants. They were held in domestic servitude. They were held in forced labor in all of those locations, and they were paid nothing. Kendra managed to escape, brought suit, and now there is a criminal indictment in Kansas. This case is ongoing. Next slide, please. Again, this is not the only case. This is ripped from the television screen. This is a case in Southlake, Texas, involving a child who, like Evelyn, was only 9 years old. She was brought to the United States from Conakry, Guinea, to live in this very lovely home in a very wealthy suburb, where she was, as Evelyn said, like a mother to 5 children in this family. And I want to give you some of the key aspects of this case that indicate the difference between children who are held in forced labor and the children in the family. The children in the family all went to school. This child, referred to as DD in the case, she did not. The children all had orthodonture. They all had braces. This child did not. She not only didn't get to go to the dentist, when she did have problems, they took her to a clinic where they removed her teeth because some were infected. A tooth that later became infected, they wouldn't take her back. And so she took the tooth out herself with pliers in the home. Like Evelyn's case, she was subjected to physical violence. This case ended in a guilty verdict. The husband and the wife, who were very wealthy and very powerful, the husband was the son of the former president of his country, and the wife was the daughter of the former, I think, Secretary of State or foreign minister of this country. They came to the United States. They lived in this lovely suburb, surrounded by neighbors. Like in Evelyn's case, this child walked the other children to school, but no one ever asked why this child didn't go to school. And so when she finally escaped 16 years later, neighbors who testified at the criminal trial in Texas said, "We saw her going to the grocery store. We saw her walking home from the grocery store with heavy bags of groceries, and we couldn't figure out why a child that small was going to the grocery store by herself. She wasn't even taller than the mailbox." But the neighbors said nothing. And it wasn't until she escaped as an adult that the case went forward as a criminal case. Next slide, please. This is a case that was just recently charged, October 2020. This is another case that is still ongoing. The defendants have, I think, since been charged with allegations involving forced labor of another child. These are children who were undocumented minors who were brought from Guatemala and allegedly held in forced labor, where the defendants kept all of their wages. So this case, indicted by the Northern District of Illinois, is also ongoing. Next slide, please. Most of the cases that I've talked about have been federal cases. There are very few federal criminal labor trafficking cases last year. According to the most recent data that we've seen, which is from 2020, there were only 15 forced labor cases involving children or adults in the entire country brought by federal prosecutors. So 15 cases in the entire country. Unfortunately, states have been even more reluctant to bring forced labor cases. This is an exception. This is a case in Texas where a woman and her husband were both indicted And she was found guilty for child abuse and human trafficking for taking children out of the foster care system, adopting them, and then holding them in forced labor on her puppy farm. So this husband and wife, I think, faced charges both for inhumane treatment of the animals, but then also this particular defendant received a sentence of 99 years for trafficking of the children and holding them in forced labor. Next slide, please. So I'm going to leave that here with those case examples. The only other thing I want to say is that as a lawyer representing victims of trafficking, one of the most important pieces of every case that we see is restitution. And restitution is mandatory under federal law. Trafficking victims who participate in criminal cases at the federal level against their traffickers, where there's a guilty plea or a verdict of guilty, restitution must be ordered. But unfortunately, what we see is that law observed in the breach. And our own research indicates that restitution is ordered only in about 27% of cases. That's just the number of cases where it's ordered. Unfortunately, in many cases that we see, the restitution is ordered, but then not paid. And so trafficking survivors need that restitution in order to continue with their lives. So we have lots of materials that we can share for you. I'm going to put in the chat right now the press release for the indictment on the cult case that I started with. Next slide, please. Our contact information is here. And these are all of the different ways that you can contact the Human Trafficking Legal Center. So I just want to thank Robin and STAC for having us and Florida State for having us to talk about these issues. And we're leaving plenty of time for questions because I think there has been a tsunami of questions coming into the chat. So it's been excellent to speak with all of you. Thank you for spending some time with us. I think we can stop sharing the screen and move on to questions. Thank
okay,
you.
great. And thank you both so much. Evelyn, you've, I hope, had a moment to look in the chat to see how many people, and I echo this, thank you for your courage, your strength, you know, your just zeal in doing this work, and thank you for grounding us in what's true. I also want to observe that the work that you did, the anti-racism work, the survey, the results of that survey are inextricably linked to everything we're doing now and inform us at every level in our work. So, so please, definitely, I don't know, you opened the door a little bit, but yes, yeah, I had the pleasure of attending the full webinar that you did on this when last year or whenever, you know,
Yeah, Freedom Network Conference.
Yeah, and it was very impactful on me a lot, and wanted to recommend that to everybody. You, Martina, posted the article that you and Finest Lipinga did, so we can read that. And everybody, you know, in this age of social media, please share.
And Robin, can I just add one thing?
Yes.
So Evelyn's too modest to say this, but Evelyn just testified recently before the House Foreign Affairs Committee on human trafficking. And the meeting was chaired by Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, who had read Evelyn and Finest's article and asked about the survey. And so the work that Evelyn and Finest have been doing on racism is getting attention even on the Hill, which is wonderful to see.
So impactful. And thank you for mentioning that. That is huge. I also want to mention this book. I don't know what this.
And you can watch. Sorry, you can also watch the testimony on C-SPAN. They still have it up. Okay, great. Oh gosh, I wish I could have that. But anyway, we'll find that. But you told me about this book, Finest Slaves Among Us. Okay. I mean, Finest. I said Finest. Okay, Evelyn. Yeah, I'm thinking of you and Finest. Of a book, and so Monique Veller, which started this conference. What is it? Trust Women Conference, and it was all thanks to Martina that I got into this conference that I spoke at. And so Monique wrote this book and featured me and other survivors and work that we do. So I just started seeing she was looking for a book until I write my own book. That is the book that I'm featured in, and others, my other survivor colleagues that are also featured in the book. And it just described, my story, me, being a survivor and how I got a job, in this big law firm, because I was at that conference. I was like, survivors, we are more than just our voices. Yes, you can have compassion. You can listen to our story. You can feel sorry, but do something about it by employing us. So the law, Baker McKenzie law firm was there, and they were like, okay, we'll hire you. And again, all this is all connection. This is Martina's effort. Like, yeah, you need to get you. I think you'll be good at this conference, And even the writer of the book, when she wanted us to speak at the conference, she's like, I don't pay survivors to, she didn't quite understand. So I educated her on that. So she has learned a lot from me. Like, you cannot be doing that. So I'm so happy that I've built a friendship with her, and she's been able to understand that survivors need to be paid for their time, and survivors need more than just sharing your story. They need to be employed. So it's a great book for you to read and learn about all the survivors that have been in this conference from all around the world.
It really is. And when you mentioned it, and just so you all know, we're having an event at a local store/bookstore, and they wanted books to make sure that they had on hand for this event for our local organization Stack. So I put it out there and just said, anybody have any good books? And of course, we're waiting for yours, Evelyn.
I'm getting there.
In the meantime, I read this the very next weekend after you suggested it, and I will tell everyone it is really important, compelling, and thank you for your contributions there as well. So yes, I highly recommend this book. And just for those of you in the Big Bend and elsewhere, we do a newsletter a few times a month, and I did a brief review and then cited to the Kirkus review of this book. Really want to highlight survivor voices throughout our work in all ways. So I think we're going to have a standard feature both on the Stack website and on in our newsletter of books featuring survivors' voices and wisdom. So you've got a spot there when that book is out. But when before then, if anyone has any ideas, I'll post my email again, but you can just be in touch with us at stack@surviveandthriveadvocacy.org. If you're wanting to review a book or have reviewed a book and can recommend it, let's please share the word about all of these amazing resources. So let me get to some questions, and there were some great ones, and I thank you all too for your your ongoing comments. Yes, Miss Evelyn is a living miracle. Yes, congrats on the new job. So people are connecting and supporting you and your work so much. Somebody asked Evelyn, what interventions do you think gave you the ability to survive your experience?
That's a good question. I guess you can say, I would say faith. For me, it's faith. It's hard. I know a lot of people don't like to talk about religion. Me myself, I question religion a lot of the times, but because again, my trafficker, her family also owned like a big church back in Cameroon, and we were going to church every day. Every Sunday. It was like, okay, you did all these horrible things to me, but then you go to church and you pray. So it was But for me, I would say it was faith and just not giving up on hoping. One day, I'm still hoping. Will Smith, I don't give up on your dreams, but it was fate. And what will make me happy, even there were times that I want to cry, I want to kill myself, I used to just sneak and just watch the Fresh Prince again. The comedy made me laugh. Like, I like to laugh, as you can see. I just that brings me but faith, and just knowing that there is a light at the tunnel, even though it was so hard. It was difficult. And then when my trafficker brought my cousin, because I remember I said my trafficker used one passport and brought 6 of us, and one of those 6 was my cousin. So when my cousin came, I was really excited because I thought, okay, I'm going back. I was like, yeah, I'm going back, and just thinking of my mango tree that I used to climb back in Cameroon. But faith is really what got me, just knowing that it is going to get better. There were times I wanted to run away. There were other times I wanted to take the easy road out, which was to kill myself. But I just didn't know what to do. And then I guess another thing was I did have a brother, my older brother. If you watch the movie Taken, like the Liam Nelson, the first one, not all of the other one, nobody, like even my uncle that made the arrangement, nobody ever called to check on me to see how I'm doing. But my brother, because he was away in the university, when he found out that my uncle sent me to this stranger, my brother called me, and I was surprised that my trafficker, she let me talk on the phone, but I couldn't say anything. I was just crying. I was like literally just crying. For some reason, my brother knew something was wrong. I don't know how he got here, but he got here. But he also gave me hope that at least someone cared. But faith to me, really, to your question. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think that answers the question. I know that we might hear from somebody if it hasn't. So someone's thanking you for you are an inspiration and proud of you and your strength. The other thing that's recently come up in our work, also that your experience is telling me about, is that someone can be trafficked, get out of that situation, and be out of that situation and not be in this moment of, oh, immediately they're out of the trafficking situation, and so then we help them right away. There could be years between when there's trafficking happening and then still the assistance and the rights that you have as a survivor. So sometimes, I mean, can you speak to that gap? I think we've been conditioned to see people going on these raids or whatever you call it, and yet that's not how we do our work.
No, it's not like that. And that's a very good question, because again, like you said, Robin, there is gaps, and there's always gap. And especially for labor trafficking, survivors, there's always different gaps, And for me, my experience, I was a child. I never knew that I had family members here. And remember I said that, I went to a family member, my cousin helped me escape. We went to stay with an aunt, but the aunt also took advantage of me. She also had kids, and also depending on the community. Like I was in the Cameroonian community, and my trafficker also knew my aunt, like, because they're the same age group, they hang around the same people. But I never really knew that I have family members here. And so my cousin that was brought said, hey, we have to escape. I was like, where are we going to go to? Like, where are we going to go to? I've tried to escape. So she had information about my other family member, because she was older. We escaped. We went to my aunt, but my aunt also took advantage of me she heard my story. She saw my scar. She saw the trauma. She even saw me talking to trees, like I was literally talking to trees, and she just didn't know what to do with me. And she just had a baby as well. So I took care of her baby, just staying there while her other two daughters were going to school and just growing. And things were happening to me as a woman, and again, especially if you're foreigners, we don't know, which is why we need lawyers. We don't know. I didn't know, we don't know that you need documents to work in this country. I didn't know a lot of things. And the most important thing, I did not know that I was a victim. A lot of us didn't know that we were victims. So I stayed with my aunt. The kids are growing, I'm growing, things are happening to me as a woman I didn't know. And also a lot of us won't say this, but labor trafficking, when we run into situations, some we end up getting married to people, and they traffic us. Like my family members were like, oh, you should get married to your cousin, that's how you can get papers. And it did happen. My cousin because I had a cousin that really liked me and really wanted to help me. And and this speaks to like judges, because there's this judge that I would never forget, but I did get married to my cousin. There's always this gap, to get papers. And I didn't quite, when I did share my story, the judge that helped on the case annulled the marriage, and also really thanked my cousin for what my cousin did, but said that's not how you go about it. But he understood because like I was a child, but there's always a gap. We end up being re-victimized. I guess you can say that in that gap until we go and get the help, which I did run away, and I went to a church and I told my story. And then from there were all this law enforcement, everybody. And it happens to a lot of survivors of labor trafficking. There's always a gap. We try to see how we can make amends, do a business, or sometimes we end up being deported, without no one hearing our story.
And not
I don't
knowing
know
your
if
rights.
I answered the question right, but maybe Martina can tie into it.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Anything else, Martina? And you answered that question and a couple of others that have come in since, but Martina, yes.
So Evelyn mentioned the importance of having a lawyer. And Evelyn, I just wondered if you could talk about Melanie Orhand and the role that Melanie Orhand played as your pro bono counsel in the criminal prosecution and in your case.
Yeah, thanks, Martina. So so I did not even mention this amazing woman, and to this day we're in contact. So Melanie Onhart was one of the attorneys that was on my case, and she was really the person that made me feel comfortable to be able to share a lot of details, even the whole part about me getting married to my cousin, because again, I was scared when I first came out to tell my story. There were all these people. I don't know who was who. I didn't know who was FBI, who was from Homeland Security, who was a prosecutor. I did not know, but Melanie helped me to understand that. She was an attorney. She helped me to identify who was who. But not only that, she helped me to give a reason to trust, because I was not going to trust these people because I didn't know them. Especially the FBI that was on my case that was accusing me of like, oh, you just want green card. I'm like, what the heck is a green card? And just speaking of that gap, like my aunt that I told you about created fake documents for me. And it happens a lot of the time. She created fake documents and she used my real name, Melanie just played such a good impact as a lawyer. Like, I know that she was, to me, there are people that do their job because it was a job, but Melanie did her job. She did it with passion. She gave me a reason to and yeah, was this white woman. I'm like, okay, what is going on? Yeah, but I just related more with her. She made me feel comfortable. She taught me about my rights. She made me understand that I was a victim. And that's why I said why we need lawyers, but we need lawyers that can be able to teach us to know that, because she was saying that what that lady did to you, Evelyn, is wrong. Melanie would tell you is wrong, but you have a choice. If you want to speak, you can speak. If you don't, we can just walk away. She just built that relationship, I don't know. I'm still hoping when I get my restitution, like Martina mentioned, I had always tell Melanie, if I get my restitution, girl, you get half, I get half. I'll buy you a nice car.
You're very generous on top of everything else.
Yeah.
So Thank you for that. We've got comments. People are asking where survivors go when they want to run away. I think that's a very broad-based question.
We had this question,
Yeah.
But like I said, it depends on each survivors. I know there are a lot that are afraid of like churches, because again, not everyone in church is great. I can tell you that. But for me, back in Cameroon, I went to a Catholic school, and there was this father that I always remember. His name is Father Michael. He was German. He was a German priest, and so I'm in Maryland. So there was this church. It's a city called Silver Spring, because that's where my situation happened. And we in Maryland, there was this church, and again, you talk about the gaps. Like, I had run away. There were men that were noticing me. There was a young man from Haiti that, noticed me and also was teaching me like, hey, you're supposed to be going to school. Why are you here? I'm in school. He was like 17. He's like, I'm in school. You can go to school too. I was like, no, my auntie said I can't go to school because I don't have papers. you know, and he's like, no, 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 your auntie's using you. Your auntie is abusing you. You're supposed to be in school, you know? So he took me and I was living with him, but I was like, I can't stay with a man. So I ran away from, you know, I didn't run away from him, but I just, he, you know, I say, you know, it was very nice. They took me in, the parents were very nice. They helped me, but I went to the church. So people, it depends on their situation, depend on their environment and where to go. But for me, I went but to a church and I met with a priest and I just told that priest, and the priest just gave me a card, Catholic Charity. And from there, I when my friend, my Haitian friend helped me, we went to Catholic Charity, and I told my story. But back then it was very hard, you know, like I came here in the mid 90s. So, and then I ran away like in the early 2000s. So maybe Martina, because Martina has dealt with a lot of cases, maybe she want to add to where like other people go. But for me, it was a church.
I think that's actually one very important place that people run, adults and children. But I would also point to homeless shelters.
Yeah.
Because what we have learned from the survivors, what they have taught us is that when you run away from a trafficker, you are often homeless. And so the survivors sometimes end up in regular shelters.
Mhm.
And some
And
end up begging on streets, you know, do I know survivors that have end up just being on the street begging and things like that. So, yeah.
and they may show up in many other systems in addition to the homeless system too, right? Or, you know, they may reach out to a guidance counselor or somebody in school. We have, you know, community kids who are being trafficked and they're not in
Yeah.
any formal system now. So that's why I think it's so good to take a broad-based approach to educating everybody in the community, because someone is not going to present always as a person who's been exploited for labor or sex. They're going to maybe have all these other things maybe going on.
And Robin,
That's
can I
very,
just add
very
one?
true.
Oh, go ahead, Evelyn, sorry.
No, no, no. I was just telling Robin that's very true. Maybe schools and things like that. Yep.
One case that I didn't put in the deck, but is a very important case because we see this fact pattern. There was a case in Ohio of unaccompanied minors from Guatemala brought in, turned over to sponsors by the Office of Refugee Resettlement as unaccompanied minors, turned over to sponsors, but the sponsors were actually traffickers who had tricked the system, right? They had figured out how to game the system. And that case was prosecuted because the children were put into a horrible situation, living situation, a completely ramshackle, tumbling down mobile home with no heat and no water. The children were held there. They had very little food. They couldn't communicate with their real sponsors, their families who had planned to take them in the United States. And those children were held in forced labor in an industrial egg farm, right? A corporation that should have known that there were children working, harvesting eggs for grocery stores. So the unaccompanied minor system is also something that needs much, much more oversight.
Was this the subject of the Trafficking in America documentary series that, okay.
Yeah,
So
that's
people
exactly right.
can watch that Trafficking in America on PBS to see that such a well done piece. Quick question for you, Evelyn, is that how much time it said it took to convict the person accused in your case, and what about victims' compensation? And maybe it's both. I don't know how long it took to get the conviction, but what sentence did they receive, and was there crimes comp that you
Yes.
received?
So yes, so my case was prosecuted, and it was even investigated also all the way. They did go back to my country and investigate my case. And my trafficker was sentenced for 5 years. But before my case came to her, she already was being charged for also embezzling money. Remember, I had mentioned that I was washing the car. She had a transportation business because she also embezzled money from the government. So she was given 5 years, but then she ran away. And I don't know whatever arrangement the US government have with Cameroon, but they had said she has to come back, you know. And when she came back, I think altogether was 17 years. And it's really sad that I'm even saying this because she was released last year. And, you know, I had to find out from a friend. She was released last year. I was like, wow, it's been 17 years already.
Hmm.
But, and just like Martina mentioned about the case of the young lady in the house, you know, there were weaknesses. There was a lot of weaknesses, because not only did I take care of her kids, there was a neighbor that, you know, that we had that were also from Nigeria. They had a boy that was the same age as my trafficker's son that I was also taking care of. And they testify. And I remember the neighbor sent me a note. I think Melanie on her gave me that note, say, hey, they wanted to say sorry, they didn't know, but they just like, you know, Martina mentioned, people see things, but they're just afraid. They knew it was wrong, you know, but they were afraid to say stuff. But she was, and then I did get a restitution order of $100,000. Just to go back again, the government took their own money from that embezzlement, but I wish they gave me my $100,000 as well. You know, but it's like Martina mentioned, it's really hard for us, especially, you know, labor trafficking, you know, cases. When they get prosecuted, these restitutions are ordered, but it's hard for us to obtain them, you know. So I am grateful for the connection that Martina connected me with some attorneys, you know, at Aiken Gum, that are helping me to get my restitution, because it has been ordered, but nobody said that, hey, she can be getting it. You know, there were court fees that are there, but nobody says anything. It is really hard for us to get our restitution back. So, but my trafficker is actually out and probably will be getting ready to be sent back to Cameroon.
Robin, can I just add one thing on restitution? Because what Evelyn points to is very important. You have cases where the government forfeits all the assets of the defendant, and then that money goes to the federal treasury and not to the victim. And that is wrong. And so in cases like that, we can petition the government through an office called the Money Laundering and Asset Recovery section of the Department of Justice, the MLARS for short, right? Washington, the land of acronyms. So the Money Laundering and Asset Recovery section has a process called restoration, where you can claw back assets that are forfeited from defendants in order to pay restitution. Or you can actually do another process called remission, which is a petition to the Money Laundering and Asset Recovery section to provide compensation to a victim when there is no restitution order. But Robin, I'll be frank, like these administrative actions take years. And we changed the law in 2015 so that the government couldn't forfeit assets and keep those assets. But the law, like so many of these laws to protect trafficking victims, is again observed in the breach.
And can you talk, Martina, a little bit about how you would be there, how the, you know, that your legal center would be there if a lawyer said, look, I don't have expertise around, you know, violent crimes or family law or things that are really immediate, but I can go after assets, or I'm good on bankruptcy, or I'm good. So how could you work with some of the lawyers that you and I know who are just, you know, in a corporate practice, for example?
Right. So we train pro bono attorneys across the United States, and we are happy to work with pro bono attorneys. And then the goal is to connect those pro bono attorneys with trafficking survivors. But I think there are lots of questions for Evelyn. So Robin, I would love to do like a whole webinar on restitution. Like,
okay,
we'll come back. We can talk about restitution for an hour.
I think we've got Third Friday programs.
No, Robin, just to add to that, restitution is really important. And that's why I'm glad that Martina is bringing it up and talking about it, because there's so many survivors that were order restitution, and this restitution, this money can really help us, financially, because again, we get out of the situation. Like myself, I went to school. For me, if I knew that student loan was going to be some crisis for me, I would have never, I would have never gone to get an education, and this restitution is important. It is important for this victim, for us to get this money, because it helped us get back into society. It helped us with the financial struggles that we are dealing with. And I think I like Martina said, we need another webinar just for restitution and why we did it.
All right, stay tuned, everybody. We're going to get that in the works for sure. Now, somebody mentioned, and Martina, you mentioned the case of the egg farm case and the children from Guatemala. They were males. Somebody asked, we heard today about labor trafficking where females are the victims. What does labor trafficking look like for males? I think you kind of answered that, but do you want to talk a little bit more, or do either of you want to address that?
So, Evelyn's part of an entire network of labor trafficking survivors. So, Evelyn, maybe you can take that
I mean, I can add to it, but you can also talk because you have dealt with labor trafficking males as well, right? Martina, yeah, I mean, males are involved. I know, I would say from cultural aspect, for me, like, I know there are men that came from my country that are victims as well, but a lot of the times, not a lot of male want to come out and speak up. They just it's just like for them it's like, wow, would somebody take me serious that I'm a victim of labor trafficking? Because there are a lot of survivor leaders that are male that are out there that are sharing their story. One of them is reside in Florida, Ronnie Marty. He's a survivor of labor trafficking from the Dominican Republic. There are amazing male survivors out there that are so strong. There's Harold de Sous, from India, that was trafficked with his family. Their stories, there are male that are really out there speaking out. So male are not left out, but as you know, the world, women are more vulnerable to the situation a lot, but there are male that are out there that are victims and they are survivors and they are speaking out.
You mentioned as well how victims of labor trafficking also suffer sexual assault and sex trafficking as well. And it's one of the concerns that we've seen very often. When people think of children and trafficking, they only think of sex trafficking. So, is there anything you would like to add on that point, and in terms of survivor perspectives, or things that we should just know as people in the community doing this work?
Thank you, Robin, for that question. So I will give my experience. Again, I like to use my experience to tell the world. And there are other survivors also that probably have, shared, went through the same experience as me. Just for me, like, yes, for me, coming from another country, it is not a normal thing to just be talking about sex or being that, oh, you were raped, but I do know survivors that have reached out to me that are from my country, like, that would tell me that they were forced to cook and clean, taking care of kids, and then they will also have to go out and sell their bodies. And it happens a lot. And not only that, sometimes as a survivor of domestic servitude, it took me a long time to just come with myself to say that, hey, I was raped, because it's not something that you want to, coming from my country, it's not something I felt comfortable talking about, and I think even Melanie, we mentioned, she had asked me this, but I wasn't ready to share, because she was like, if somebody taught you should tell me, tell me now. But I just didn't know how to tell her that, because I didn't even know what was happening. But like I told you, my trafficker had businesses, and she had men that were working for her that were driving the cars to go and pick up disabled folks. And one of those men came into the house that had because I used to help charge the walkie-talkie radios, and so I let him in the house to get the radio, and he raped, and I just never really talk about that. It's just now, but a lot of the times, us that are victims of labor trafficking, we do get sexually exploited. And not only that, sometimes it depends. Our trafficker, if they're married, the man can be raping you every day. You can have kids for that man. It happens a lot of the time. So when you are investigating a labor trafficking case, try to also ask those questions, but find a way to ask them, especially if they're from another country, because sex is not something that people from my country so freely to talk about.
Thank you. And yes, and that is often shared with many people. It is hard to talk about, and we don't know how many interactions, conversations that it will be that a survivor will share, right? Maybe never. It just depends. It just all depends.
Yeah. And I mean, we just need to, because again, people just really confuse human trafficking with sex a lot, because I don't know what is with the word sex that the world focus so much on it a lot of the time, because there've been 100 cases of labor trafficking, but the media's focus a lot on like sex trafficking, and you have to understand that trafficking is more than just that. And there are children that are dying, like Martina mentioned the case of Kendra, like she's a survivor of labor child trafficking and she's American and right here in America. So don't think that it's only us that leave another country and come here. It happens to American victims that are also, born here and they're victim of labor trafficking as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. Um, I'm remembering too, we had a third poll question and it's reminding me of labor trafficking around the world. And I'm wondering, I think we should put it up and let me ask USF to put it up and have yet even more conversations about even more topics. But let me do this. While USF is putting it up, Brent has asked, could you talk a little bit about child labor trafficking where the labor involves criminal activities? And you might know Brent Woody. Hi, Brent. He does a lot of work on expungement cases, and it's of other criminal activity that survivors might have committed during the time of their being trafficked. So if either you want to do that, and in the meantime, you all could be looking at this poll question. I'm sorry, that was awkward to put it in here like this, but it's important. So
it's my fault. I forgot to put it up.
No,
I can take that one.
Hey, it's Friday. We're here. That's what I say. So, so we've got that poll question up about, how your purchasing decisions are made, and if they reflect an awareness that hands that have been in forced labor and trafficking have gone to produce those items, whether it's your cell phone or chocolates on Valentine's Day. We want to we'll leave this up for a while, Carolyn, if you don't mind, so people can answer. But really, can you talk about labor where the labor is actual criminal activity? And very often people don't realize that traffickers force people to, into retail theft, into drug sales, into a whole host of shoplifting, criminal stealing gift cards, which then they use to advertise people online. Like there's this whole underworld of criminal activity of labor trafficking, children and adults. So what can you say about that?
Absolutely. First, hello to Brent Woody, and Brent has done amazing work on expungement and vacatur. So I'm glad you're here. And I'm glad you asked this question. I'm actually not going to use a US example. There are lots of US examples. I'm going to use an example from the UK. Because in the United Kingdom, there was a case that went all the way to the High Court of children brought to the United Kingdom from Vietnam, held in apartments where they were forced to grow marijuana and tend marijuana plants. Those apartments were busted. The children were arrested. The children were prosecuted and thrown in prison, even though they were found to be trafficking survivors. So this went all the way up to the High Court, and a brilliant lawyer named Parosha Chandran, who was recently named as one of the tip heroes by the Department of State from the United Kingdom, she brought that case and managed to get those children out of prison. But children who are forced to commit crimes as part of their human trafficking, whether it's drug crimes or drug harvesting or drug muling, we see that as well here in the United States. Children should not be arrested for any of these crimes. They should not be prosecuted for any of these crimes. And, it's actually a pity that the work of Brent Woody's center is necessary, because what Brent is doing is going back and reversing criminal convictions that never should have been put in place in the first place.
And quite a bit of the information that came out of, I think, the first survey that the Department of Juvenile Justice did in Florida on this, people were thinking that when you looked at juveniles who committed crimes would be arrested for prostitution or sex crimes. But guess what? It was around other crimes, masking crimes, other things, and sometimes things like stealing food so they themselves could eat and survive. And so, there are so many layers to that point of don't arrest kids who are being trafficked, and how do you find out and how do you know?
And Robin, one other thing I'll just flag very, very quickly, and then I want to go through the poll results. We are getting more and more requests for assistance where there has been financial fraud committed by the trafficker. So the trafficker steals the social security number of the child or the adult victim, files false tax returns, collects the tax refund. The trafficker files for false student loans, collects the student loans. That fraud, that harm, that credit destruction follows these survivors for years to come. And so, It's very important to look broadly. And I always say that trafficking survivors don't come to us with just one legal issue, they come with an entire buffet. And so it takes a village of lawyers, in some cases, an army of lawyers, to deal with all of the legal issues that trafficking survivors face once they escape.
I'm wondering if you could post also, if somebody could, it's hard to do all this, but the FAST initiative and a bank here in town, Capital City Bank, has just approached us and said they want to figure out how to help restore victims' credit, help them, get, just do all the things when their identity has been stolen or their credit's been wrecked by a trafficker because they forced them to open up bank accounts, credit, all that.
Yeah,
Use fake documents,
Use
like
fake,
I had mentioned.
yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it happened to me, and when I had to go get a job, I think it was in the bank, they did a credit report and the bank said, you had another, you used to have another social security, but that social security was not my real social security.
Wow.
And I didn't get that job as a bank teller that I wanted to be a bank teller. And it's like, and that was my aunt that did that. Again, that was in the early 2000s, and having fake social security and fake IDs, fake working permit was like, yeah, it was easy.
And it's another way for people to walk the talk. We have so many good corporate citizens in our communities that want to do something, but this is a way that they themselves can take direct action to help. It's not, we certainly encourage them to support our work locally, but this is how they can do their work and support survivors. So thank you for that. Quick question before we get to that poll results, and we have quite a few because the USF Center for Child Welfare we have a lot of people who are perhaps foster parents, child welfare workers here on this call, and somebody's asking, are there promising practices, models, or programs for child welfare to support survivors of child labor trafficking to heal? So what's out there for for people who are the helpers to understand child labor trafficking in particular and help survivors?
There's a lot you can do. I think I did send my call of action, but child welfare, I think I do remember I worked on a child welfare bill right here in DC as a foreigner, because again, it was hard to get services as a foreigner. That was the crime happened here. It was really hard for me to access it. Being in foster care, there was a lot of services that I couldn't be part of because for one, I didn't have documents, and then two, I guess the social welfare, they didn't quite understand my situation. And there was one thing I did forget to mention in my story. I never really knew my birthday. I knew I was born in 85, but I really never knew that until when they went to investigate my story back in Cameroon and brought my real birthday. So I make it a mission to celebrate. So I didn't know a lot of those things. And it made it really hard for me to be part of a lot of events in foster care. Because I remember in foster care, there were all these kids, they said that when they were putting money aside for like college, but I couldn't benefit for those things because I didn't have papers, and my case was still being, was going through the court and was still being investigated. But I wish that there can be some kind of thing in the child welfare, especially as a foreigner, of child labor trafficking, that they can make it easier, because we didn't ask to be here. I mean, again, I didn't ask to come to this country. I just wanted to marry Will Smith. But for many kids that are here illegally, that are forced here illegally and are forced to work illegally, they are kids. Think about it. They are kids. Traffickers are forcing them to beg and to do this. And now you guys want to help them. So we need this child welfare to be, to be able to be accessible in a way that can help both American and foreign survivors that did not ask to come to the country illegally because they had no knowledge of what they're doing. So
absolutely,
yeah, because there was just a lot of programs that I could not attend in the foster care system due to my situation and the fact that I came to the country illegally. So
okay.
Yeah.
And you know what? There are questions in here about, kind of red flags for those seeking sponsorships. There's more about how we combat stereotypes around people saying, oh, well, that's their culture, that's how they do it. How do we deal with these mistaken, just what you said, just remember, they're children.
Yeah, and you have to understand that, yes, in my culture, even before my trafficker came, I was living with my uncle, and my uncle daughter had a child, and I used to take care of the child. But when I say take care of the child, I did not give the child the bath. I did not change the child's diaper. I did not feed the child. I would just hold the child while the mom goes in the kitchen. Or that's like me telling my son, hey, can you hold this baby? Let me go in the kitchen to do something. I would, my aunt, my uncle was not beating me up for burning the food up.
Yes.
It wasn't a culture thing that you have to, yes, there's discipline, but there's certain limits of discipline. I yell at my son, Malcolm, don't do that. Don't do that. But you don't see me using a whip like boom, boom. Malcolm, that was wrong. You should have not done that, So it's not a culture thing. In our culture, kids are supposed to help their parents. But when we say help, do the dishes. Yeah, I was age 9. I can do the dishes, but I wasn't forced to do the dishes.
Thank
There's
you.
a difference. I wasn't forced to do the dishes. It's just a routine. It's just, Malcolm, when you come back, like right now, I'm teaching my own son, wash your dish when you're done, when you clean after yourself. You guys have kids. So don't say it's our culture thing, because our culture does not force us to be beaten. It does not force us to cook that we don't know what we're cooking. Because my mom or my aunt will not let me in the kitchen if I don't know what I was cooking. And to say it's really aching me that they're saying it's a culture thing, and there's different type of culture. It's not a culture thing. It's not me taking care of kids and being abused. That's not a culture thing.
Yes. Yes. And
my uncle taking money for me, that's not a culture thing.
Right. Exactly. And thank you. Thank you. And I know we could go on for another hour easy. And we are actually 1 minute over, but I think that's okay. What I'd like to do, Martina, is ask you both if you'd like to say anything concluding, maybe briefly, any reflections on the poll as we close, and I'll turn it back over and we will conclude for the day.
So I just want to thank the University of South Florida and thank the Stack Center for inviting us. And Evelyn, you get the last word.
Same here. Just say thank you. Thank you for having us here, and thank you for wanting to learn. And again, like I echo, we need lawyers, we need educators, and thank you for this university for hosting this program. Everything is a learning experience. You're learning because my story can teach you to help the next victim better. And it's important that we continue having this discussion when it comes to labor trafficking and trafficking in general, because it is a horrible crime and it affects us survivors enormously. So let's come up with a different way to help the victims and to help the survivors that have escaped. So thank you. I appreciate it. And we need more lawyers. So have more free pro bono lawyers, because we can't afford some of them.
There you go. And everybody, thank you, Evelyn. I mean, you all are getting so many comments of thanks and gratitude. And yeah, please contact Martina and Evelyn. And definitely, if you're a lawyer out there or know one, you have a role to play here. I challenge anybody to think of any. I mean, as a lawyer, there's not a part of our practice areas that would not help a trafficking victim. They all could. You all could. So
thank you, Robin, for being a great moderator.
Oh,
I appreciate it.
This is a blast. You are welcome. Anytime you all want a moderator, call me. I'm there.